Greetings, everybody, and welcome back to another installment of the Healing Brothers Podcast special Father's Day edition. We have two guests with us, Charles Dixon and Guy Bowling. And of course, as always, we have the legendary Sam Simmons. How are you gentlemen doing today?
Wonderful. Happy Father's Day. Happy Father's Day, everybody.
Absolutely. Happy Father's Day. So we wanted to open it up and have a nice conversation about fatherhood, about Black men being fathers, about what fatherhood meant to us or did not mean to us, and just establish kind of an understanding of what is the important role of fathers within our community now, what it has been in the past, and what it can be in the future. Anything you want to add, Sam?
No, I think that covers it, and we'll just see how we go. I'm looking forward to a good show, a very thoughtful show as well.
Awesome. So let's start with you, Guy, Mr. Bowling. First time on the podcast. When it comes to fatherhood, what comes to mind for you when you hear the term or the word fatherhood? Given the work that you do, what comes to mind for you?
For me, again, thanks for having me, Brandon and Sam, on the Healing Brothers podcast. But one of the first things that comes to mind for me is how I was introduced to fatherhood. In particular, not having a father. That's one of the first things that comes to mind, and not even realize that I didn't have a father based on the community that I grew up in. I'm originally from Chicago, south side of Chicago, moved to Minnesota in junior high school, and didn't realize that the father wasn't present, because in my neighborhood there was many fathers present at all, and this was during the 70s, and we know the research that all that says that families were still together, but I think that was during the time that families began to break apart. And so I didn't even realize that I didn't have a father until many years later, and the impact that had on me. So one of the first things I think about is my mother actually playing that dual role as both mother and father to the best of her ability, but also utilizing other men in the community that I looked to as father figures. That was the closest thing I even knew of what a father was when I was a kid. So that's the first thing that comes to me when I think about father.
Got it. Thank you. How about for you, Charles? When you hear the word father or the term fatherhood, what comes to mind for you?
Some I guess stereotypical, maybe traditional thoughts of provider, protector. I think it looks different depending on the situation. Now I see fathers as being nurturers and many more things than simply a provider and protector. In relation to my experience with my pops, I'm actually in Minnesota because of my pops. It's with bitter sweetness that the fatherhood topic in general is brought up, because on one hand, we got some generational issues where some fathers are not connected, and to be working with fathers and not be directly connected to your own pops, if they're living or not, that's always a issue. But I think I've had some good examples of how to be a father. I would be remiss if I didn't mention the fictional representation of the Cosbys. That was the Huxtables was that was fatherhood to me. That's what I saw. That was healthy for me. Now I see my example of fatherhood is trying to have a balance of being more than what you thought you wanted or needed, in terms of your dad not being present, and then doing what's best for your children today. I think overcompensating by spoiling young folks with material things because I didn't necessarily have it has not been beneficial for us. Raising young people, seeing how entitled they become, given all the pressures of society, not having a lot of compassion for our people. So that's a long-winded way to respond to the whole issue of fatherhood. It's really complex for me. And not enough time to really get into it, honestly, as you guys know.
Got it. Thank you for sharing. And hopefully throughout today's dialogue, we can dive a little deeper into, what fatherhood means, the contextual
Mhm.
pieces to fatherhood, and where are we headed when it comes to Black men and being fathers within the community. How about for you, Sam? You hear the word of the term fatherhood, or you think about being a father or even a grandfather. What are some of the thoughts that come from your perspective?
Well, um, contrary to the narrative, I think sometimes the narrative of mainstream of Black fathers, we don't realize how much as a community we get caught up into that same narrative. We, or are affected very negatively in interesting ways. Like, when we when we talk about, and this is just me, because I was raised with my father, right? And I grew up in a neighborhood that you had kids who was raised with their fathers and kids who weren't raised with their fathers, and so I think that sometimes we don't realize how our terms also can affect not just the visuals of or how young people see fathers or Black fathers. Like, for example, I didn't have a father. No, we all had a father. Your father just wasn't present. We gotta watch those terms, right? You know, and I understand why folks say those things. Secondly, we have moms who had to raise us by themselves. But when we start getting into moms being our fathers too, I have a problem with that. Because again, you're nullifying men and you're nullifying fathers in an interesting way. But again, see, the interesting thing about nuance is sometimes we get caught up in all or nothing. You get an old dude like me who would just snap out on young folks about what they say. But I understand why somebody would say that, because that's the way it felt. That was their experience and that kind of stuff. But I've also known different type of single mothers who raised their kids, right? I've ran into single mothers who knew they could not be what we would call a father to their children, but had to raise them in spite of the absence of their daddies, right? They had no other choice, right? And and because of that, they made sure that those kids were exposed to what we call father figures. A lot of things that, Guy, I know that you talk about in groups and that kind of stuff, because there's been in our community, there was some good father figures who weren't father to no kids in our neighborhood, right? And like I said, I was raised with families who had both parents, and in some days, in terms of my growing up, I would think about, believe it or not, what it would be like not to have uh, my father when he was on his tirades, and me have to referee in the fights and stuff in the house, or my father's inability, and I don't even know if I have the full inability to do this, the father's inability to even say he love you, because he was raised by a hard man. Because my father is just one step from being a sharecropper himself, because he was a sharecropper's son. So we're talking about one step from being a slave, right? And growing up in an environment, especially a southern environment, that believed that you had to be, if you were in the house with your children, you had to be hard on the boys to get them strong enough to deal with this world they was getting ready to encounter. And so if I'm a boy and you find it, you thinking you're doing me good by not showing me any nurturing, right? And then want to be surprised when I don't know how to be a nurturer. When and I had to learn that along the way, is some of the stuff that we don't know in the moment, right? So there's some things that we often want to talk about, how systems set it up for Black men not to be in the home, and there's a history of that. We can go back to the slave quarters when master wanted to let every Black man know, every child you father is mine, including you. And don't get it twisted. right? And having narratives that uh, 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 fathers who during slavery would literally cut their feet off to stay with their kids, and you have narratives where they were probably as nurturing to their kids as the mothers. And then we talk about, the era of welfare. Well, the thing is I understand if we just want to take a simple narrative of that, but what was folks trying to do when welfare came around? We know that welfare was put in there to, the calm down folks right after the civil rights movement, and act like, the government act like they really cared. And we got all kind of documentation that they knew in some ways what they were doing. Even during especially during Johnson's era, there was all kind of reports done. If you read deep into the reports, they knew. They've made statements about what we need to do is bring the family together. But let's talk about how the family got broke up. Let's talk about how systems has said that we'll give your family service, but your man can't be in the house, and how that was dealt with differently in the white community than the black community. And then going through our era of the baby daddy syndrome. The history of the term baby daddy is the insult coming out of Jamaica, right? And when the earlier songs were sung about that baby daddy and baby mama, it was about it being an insult. And then the mainstream takes it in as a novelty, and now we still are using that term. And again, I might slip and use that term, but I make it real hard to talk about the father of your children when I'm working with women, and the mother of your children when I'm working with men. Because I'm like anybody else, get caught up. But when I look at fatherhood now, one of the things I'm very impressed with, and I'm impressed with all the men on this podcast, is despite what our experience has been with our personal fathers, y'all have done admirable. Can't even get it out. Y'all done an excellent. Let's see if we can get a word I can get out. Examples of what fathering could be in the black community, or what father could be no matter what community y'all come from, right? And all of y'all got y'all different nuances in terms of you. But the most important thing is the kids are the key, no matter what the frustrations and the effects of the relationships with their mothers. The children are the key. So that means that y'all have learned how to be humble, and had learned how to, realize that if it ain't a fight to make it better for my child, it ain't a fight worth having, right? So I admire that, because being the age I'm at, a lot of the examples that I grew up with were not always, it was real clear, and there's still young people now who do this, but I see more examples of men who want to be in their kids' lives. The problem comes in is we haven't worked on that other piece of how to be in relationship, right? How to be in relationship in the process, either hopefully before we have children or during when we have children. How do we have relationship? Because I know a lot of guys who are great with their fathers, but have such a disdain for the mama, which is that's not a working plan, right? And see, and I was raised in an environment that if daddy was in the house, he didn't have to do much more. If he was in the house, he was the greatest thing from toothpaste, because there was so many absent fathers, at least on the parents, because I know a lot of absent fathers who still had connections with their kids. We just didn't see it. So I know that was a long way but being at the age I'm at, and I am a grandfather now, and realizing what the grandfather's role can be in terms of being the wise old guy, that information that the parents might not have the time to share. And I'm learning that more and more, because we don't learning that more and more, and trying to find that balance between being a grandfather and not trying to tell my child how to raise her children at the same time. That's a balancing act, because there's some times it gets a little shady, and she gets a little shady with me if I say something, and I have to be aware of that. So, try to not be selfish on my part in terms of dealing with my role.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. So in the work that, well, I guess both Charles and Guy, in the work that both of you do, we'll go to Guy first and then I'll follow up with you, Charles. Working directly with fathers who are dealing with fatherhood concerns right now. I mean, this is what we're talking about, live and direct. What are these men sharing with you when it comes to the narrative of their position within their families and their children? How do they see fatherhood? How are they explaining it? How are they dealing with the trials and tribulations that come with fatherhood and the joys? What are they sharing with you all?
Well, great question, Brandon. I think from what I see, and the population I work with is primarily low income, non-custodial fathers. A lot of them didn't grow up with their father, or they didn't have a healthy, active father present. Because father can be in the home. That don't mean he's engaged with you in a way that is productive, right? And so, but the majority of them didn't have that reference, right? And if they did have a reference, it wasn't that of positivity. Right. But they still looked up to those individuals and respected those individuals for different reasons. And so the men who come to me, they're dealing with everything from child support issues to inability to be able to access their children, to relationship challenges, to legal challenges, basic necessity challenges. And so by the time they come to me, their ideology about fatherhood is, I just need to be a provider to my child. So I need to be able to give to my child financially, because from what I understand and know, that's an obligation that needs to be fulfilled, irregardless of all the additional pieces that Sam was talking about, right? And so the relationship goes sour. It is what it is, but I should just have the right to see my child. And it doesn't matter about what she thinks or what she said or what had happened between the two of us. It should just be automatically through these systems, particularly these core systems, that should automatically allow me to see my child, because that's what I used to be able to do, and I should have a right to be able to do that. And so part of it is understanding, yeah, you got it right, but there's a process to get there. In addition to, there's the ideology you got about fatherhood and responsibility as relates to being a father that a lot of them don't necessarily know or have experience to even know what all is involved in it. Because a lot of the fathers that I work with, they their kids was born with not a whole lot of planning and forethought. It just happened. It just happened. And let alone being together for the sake of, potentially thinking about marriage, let alone a healthy relationship. And so a lot of them don't even have an idea other than the fact that I made a child. I want to be there for my child. I want to do something different than my father did for me. And I think the best way to be able to do that is fulfill my financial obligation, regardless of all the other things that they experience that ultimately break the relationship.
Got it. Yep. How about for you, Charles? What's kind of the narrative with some of the men that you've engaged or connected with, work with, around their position and how they view fatherhood for themselves?
The reality is, there's a social, economic factor to manhood, well, not manhood, but fatherhood in this particular context, meaning when men can produce more fiscally, financially, and or material things, from what I've been hearing from the guys who have not been necessarily suffering through the pandemic and the folks who have taken a hit, some of their issues are across the board. Some people have issue with the visitation piece. Some folks have issue with control in general.
Right.
And that's a definite self-sabotaging tool that we use, I think, the control piece. Not knowing what we do and don't control as men, following the stereotypical view that men are supposed to control and dominate and all these different things. And when you're not in a financial position to be a provider, people talking about not being able to necessarily spend a lot of time with their children because they're working. There's people that work second shift, and that's when a lot of parenting happens during that time frame of the day, and people having to work. Brothers getting old, and still having to do physical labor, whether it's installing carpet, in the trades, so it's so many issues, and it's not always that people can't find work. It's difficult to find livable wage jobs in Minnesota,
Right.
specifically in the Twin Cities. You can find jobs, you can have 2 or 3 jobs at one time, but making ends meet and thriving is different. So a lot of brothers talking about how they benefited from unemployment when they were getting extra, and how I mean, it's across the board, man, with the conversation with the brothers have. And to me, it's all relevant. You got some folks that are doubtful and distrustful of the medical system, but still got the vaccine and
Right.
dealing with that, talking it through. Some folks still got sick after being fully vaccinated, talking that through. And just listening, basically listening to the brothers, because at the end of the day, it's not necessarily about judging or offering advice, just being that person to listen to, because sometimes people self-stabilize just by speaking verbally what they're thinking. So that's some of what I've been hearing recently, bro.
Got it. Thank you. And then Sam, you have the group going on, talking to folks throughout the radio show. People call in. What have you been hearing with some of the, the men within the community around their narrative of fatherhood, their perspective on fatherhood?
Well, actually, it hasn't been much different than what Guy and Charles are saying, because the guys, pretty much the guys I'm dealing with, are around the age range that they deal with, or come in contact with, that 18 to 35, maybe 40-year-old black men, in the whole thing about that financial piece, because that I think that's probably the most consistent piece historically that's always been brought up, no matter what, right? And helping them connect the dots to some other important things is important as well, And then even with the financial piece, how do you prioritize your financial piece for your children? Because see, not everybody I deal with, even though they might seem to fall into the demographic, of not having money. I mean, not a lot of money, but having halfway decent jobs, is how do you prioritize your money and really stay focused on your kids, and looking at that. I mean, we know that in parts of our community, money is an issue in terms of how we deal with it anyway. But not understanding that I just spent $400 on some tennis shoes, and my kids need tennis shoes, right? And the tennis shoes I go get for them might be the ones that are on sale, and then, but at the same time, why do I, in understanding that, me doing for my kids does not always going to mean that I'm going to see my kids. Right. And I know that that's unfair, because I've been in that situation. Right. And how do you help them think that through more than what's going on in the moment? Right. When you live your life in the moment, it's hard to think through the effects in the long term for your children, or the effects in terms of how you spend your money. And if you spend your money compulsively, and your significant other, even if you're not with them, see you spending your money compulsively on all these other things, and not that they have the right to tell you how to spend your money, but how do you prioritize that and make the child the center of attention, right? We can talk about making the child the center of attention. How does that show up in my behavior, right? And there's some who do a great job of letting that show up in their behavior, but trying to manage their emotions that they have by the way they feel about how bad the system is treating them, or how the emotions that they have in terms of dealing with the children's mother, those kind of things. And really, some of the old ideals they might have picked up with my old generation, that if you got a child with a woman, there's still them, you believe that you have some say so on how they should live their lives, right? And I see that on the other side too. See, I'm fortunate enough, I deal with young mothers too now, so I see both sides, and this whole idea of that child is this connection that we we can still come in and try to control another person's life. Like, and it's tough, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so again, to say the long way around, a lot of the same things is this: that what kind of other ways or uniquely different ways, considering the situation nowadays, considering we just went through this pandemic and seeing some things that like for example, the government said they couldn't do, like, we don't have money for this and this and this, but you found all kind of money to do all kind of stuff instantly, right? People are talking about that, right? And so it really helps. It really affects how the younger generation look at this. Is you've been lying all along, right? So the whole thing around the child support. How do me having difficulty paying child support, and you taking my license, and you telling me I got to go to work? That was all about punishment. That wasn't about the child. Even the systems have shown pieces that it's not about the child. It's about punishing a man, and particularly a black man or a black father, if you're going to make it worse by your sanctions, especially a group of people who know how to be mistreated and who know how to deal, who've been dealing with punishment and probably more familiar with punishment than compassion most of their life, right? And so so my focus is, because I picked my focus, and I know that Charles and Guy's focus is both but because of with their positions, a lot of their focus is on policy, a lot of their focus is on the system and that kind of stuff. That doesn't mean they're not concerned about the others, but their position. My focus around fatherhood is the internal community kind of pieces, right? Because I think we can get more bang, we can get just as much bang for our buck, or even get more changes if we really start looking at the community pieces as a result of the systems mistreating us. We have came up with a certain amount of traumas or traumatic behaviors as a result of the trauma that are not good for the children, not good for the fathers or the mothers, that I think that is real difficult for the community to take a look at. And that's why I brought up those certain ideals that, we accuse the system of saying about our black fathers. Sometimes we get caught up into them too. And maybe I'll get a chance to talk more about that as we go.
Sure.
If any of that made sense.
So in light of system challenges, there was a question from Val in the chat that says, how does the challenge of court-ordered child support play out in relationships with a child? And I'll just open that up to anybody who wants to speak on that. So how does the challenge of court-ordered child support play out in the relationships with the child?
May I interject? From my perspective, depending on the ability to pay, I think that's a major component, at least from the brothers that I've spoken to and deal with. When the ability to pay is there, it's not necessarily an issue. When the ability to pay is not there, then it's much more of a barrier and cause for conflict and justification for excuses. So, in my opinion, depending on the ability to pay, not necessarily the willingness to pay, that really has an impact on the relationship with the child and with the co-parent.
I would have to agree with Charles. The ability to pay, majority of the men that I've worked with, they don't have a problem paying child support in any kind of way, especially if they're in a position to be able to make a reasonable payment to child support. It's almost cleaner to do it that way, in a sense. But they also want to know the other side that goes with it, which typically they don't deal with in the court process. Sometimes, but most times not, access to my child. Does this automatically guarantee me access to my child? And it doesn't, unfortunately. This is the monetary side of things in terms of fulfilling an obligation. And this other side is part of family law, the custody, the parenting, and those pieces. That's a separate issue. And in most cases, they deal with it separately. So a dad's feeling like, well, wait a second, the system is set up with these draconian laws, prehistoric, that really favored the mom intentionally for so many reasons that haven't been revised in centuries. But I ultimately end up getting the short end of the stick. And so even when you think about public assistance, what Sam was talking about earlier, when we talk about welfare and all the different names that they've changed it to what we could describe it as now, is set up for mom, mom who has custody of the kids. She gets resources, right? Not a whole lot, but she gets resources. Automatic. It's law that she gets resources. And he gets debt. Those two don't even go together. Wait a minute, because if he had custody of the kids in most of them cases that she qualifies for public assistance, so would he, right? So how can you squeeze blood from a turnip? So back to Charles is saying, so automatically it's assumed his earning potential is this based on making assessments. Oftentimes guys don't even know how to even come up with those calculations, those formulas, any of that. They just know, I don't have it, I can't pay it, and here come all these sanctions. The same with early the punishment. So when you say about the fathers when it comes to child support, it's like, I don't have a problem if it's fair and it's reasonable and I'm in a position. And you have to take into consideration, choices or not, I may have multiple households I have to support financially. How do you take all that in consideration? How do you take all my other expenses into consideration? How do you determine what I'm going to pay? And on top of that, you are hesitant to allow me access to my kid. I got to go through some other channel. So it can get complicated.
Mm-hmm. You want to add anything there, Sam?
Well, this has always been a tough one for me, right? In because we got different type of court orders, right? It and this is what the benefit of dealing with both sides of this coin has helped me, right? Because even the women bring this up, right? So for me to get services I need for my children, right, I might not even want to involve the father because of our relationship, and it's been difficult. It might even, in some cases, even been dangerous, right? But to get services, the court order has to happen. Because the system is like, yeah, we'll give you services, but where's due, right? and those are the court orders. The other thing about court orders, you got the other type where I've been trying to have conversations with him and trying to negotiate with him about supporting the kids and that kind of stuff. And he don't want to negotiate. Now I ain't got no other choice but to get a court order, right? So we have to have a broader conversation about these kind of things, right? And it's interesting, we can know how systems work, but then act like we don't know how systems work, right? And so one of the things I know that with Guy's program, he tries to help guys understand how systems work so they can make better long-term choices, right? Because in the short term, you might be catching hell. Because I couldn't afford to pay my child support order, but I didn't run away from going to court to deal with it, right? And some days it worked, and sometimes it didn't, right? Because like both Guy and Charles said, it ain't about do they not want to pay something, but we don't get to decide what's reasonable, right? And the thing is the only thing that saved me is I bothered to go find out what the law was in terms of if a person is getting money, like for example from welfare, because you got the court orders, but welfare only pays so much in terms of services, and found out that they were charging me more than they was paying in services, right? And so that's the only thing that helped me. Now, they helped me in the first court piece because I wasn't avoiding paying, I just couldn't pay the amount they wanted because I was still spending money. But now the other judge who just didn't want to hear what I had to say, it went back up, right? And so the thing is how do you help young men or young fathers or fathers navigate things? Because again, we have what we're going through in the moment. How did we get here? Is it all about the system, how we got here? Or is there some things that we could have helped folks with earlier so we don't get here? Because when you look at any problem from like a public health model, you got the pre, the what's going on, and how do we change things in the future, right? And if we think about fatherhood, there's some things in all those areas I think we need to reconsider, because there's been some changes in the system because of folks like Charles and guys, at least here, in terms of really being a little bit more compassionate. But folks ain't never shown black men compassion, right? We barely sometimes show our black men compassion within our own community, right? So if you don't see that everybody in this realm deserves compassion, including the fathers, then we get these systems that were never set up for us and never had us in mind until we're in them, and now we get the worst of it. So again, I don't know. I'm
but
all over the place.
Your point, Brandon, if you don't mind, if I just piggyback on what Sam was saying, your point is so valid. And I think, it's kind of like me thinking about welfare reform and how even our program came into existence, right? So mom reform was established for mom to transition into the workplace, coming off of public assistance and giving her resources for childcare and all those other things, and jobs, leads and placements and skills and all that other stuff. But the unintended consequences was these fathers was left with this debt, right?
Right.
We're gonna supplement, because we know what she's gonna be making because of her experience, her education, her skill set, right? She's not gonna be making a whole lot, so she's gonna need her income supplemented by dad. So we're gonna get that money from him through child support. That originally was the plan. We saw that the reason we came into existence because he didn't have it. He didn't have the skills. He didn't have the experience. He didn't have the education. So his earning potential was minimal at best. He needed the same resources. But then they realized over time they needed to provide these services like the Father Project and other programs throughout the country to help these men get in a position to be economically stable to pay. Period. It goes back to they will pay if they can pay. But then the other thing is, but the unintended consequence is what these guys were going, why are we being punished? Why are we being punished because of this, right? Because and then some of the things that you're saying, Sam, if she didn't go after it, she wouldn't have got anything. Got it. Right. But the other side of it is he ended up suffering the consequences as a result of her getting support, right? When he needs it too. So then they develop programs like ours and piloted projects like ours.
Right.
But child support originally, and unintended consequence, and again, like a lot of things, the disparities show that we most affected by a good majority of these policies that happen. For the larger community, we end up suffering the most. And we can go on so many shows about that. But the other piece of it is child support wasn't originally designed with us in mind. We end up being the unintended consequence as a result of it, because child support was designed 50-something years ago for divorced mothers who would ultimately go into poverty after divorce, because at that time it was a high rate like it is now. So here's some resources for her. Welfare stepped in and then said, if we give you this, and who's most likely to apply for public assistance? We give you this, and ultimately he's going to be on the hook for that. So unfortunately, again, a policy turned into an unintended consequence that has been left there while we now see who's the most likely to be affected by it from our community of low-income men. And that's why we continue to see them at our door. And it's still draconian in the way that it was designed, because we're most being affected by it.
Well, and the other piece to go along with that, even before you talk about divorce, it was actually even before that about widows. The framework around welfare was built around widows, and they used that same framework when they decided to include other people into getting women getting services. They used that model, right? That model did not include a man. As a matter of fact, that model included a dead man. Right.
And it was widows after the war.
Right.
I mean, that's originally how it started.
Right. And so the thing is then you add in the view of the patriarchal view of America. Every man should be able to take care of his family. He's not a real man. Now we ain't gonna take into account that you make every roadblock in the way to do that. Right. Again, so when you say not thinking it out was just throwing something at the wall, letting it stick, and not taking consideration who was going to be affected by it, especially when you don't take in consideration when things affect us until after the fact anyway, right? And so so I'm agreeing with what you're saying there, Guy. So my question would be, what do we do going forward? I mean, I know that y'all are actively working from y'all different standpoints to change things or to improve things and those kind of things. What do we do forward? Both, like I said, y'all deal with systems and then also community, but systems, community, and fathers themselves. What are some of them things you can think about?
I would say, from a systems perspective, one word: funding. A fiscal floor that can be legislated, statute, so folks can be able to remain gainfully employed and still do the work. Rather, it's similar to the Ohio's commission and what they're doing there. Something legislative on the systematic level, in addition to treating fathers, one, as a part of a family, then treating the family with a therapeutic lens versus punitive.
That's right.
Systems can start there, and we'll see improvements overnight from that perspective.
And I would add to that. I think there's a multitude of things, but I would say initially, prioritizing intervening, obviously, when they're experiencing challenges and difficulties and paying child support and just other obstacles that they find themselves trying to overcome. But I think if you go further upstream, right, if you're working with them early on in the process, at that early childhood development stage, right? Even though the couple may not be coming with a whole bunch of skills and knowledge about parenting, any of that, but they're open to participation and cooperation for the sake of that child, because at that time they're looking for the future. And regardless if they came together under challenging circumstances or not, they're more open to cooperate with a future plan for their child than they are when things go sour. Once they go sour, nobody's willing to cooperate. Nobody's willing to participate. It's all about control. It's almost like they experience a whole lot of challenges and issues while the kids are school age or elementary age, or even up until, they become 18. Because if they're not together, they want control, right? And if they're not able to compromise, then you got the back and forth constantly going on. Even if it's not systemic, it's just emotional, just relationship that the both of them have with their child, and the child end up having to navigate between the two of those, just trying to make everybody happy, right? And then 9 times out of 10, the person they're with or closest to, or they live with, they decide they got the most leverage into the social mentality and the psychology of the child. So for me, going upstream earlier and trying to provide these resources earlier, but then having adequate resources for the ones who don't have it earlier to intervene, as Charles was saying, you got to support what we do in terms of putting these guys in position to be able to afford what they're responsible for, but also leading to long-term financial benefits, and not just them, but their whole family, and giving even to the economy. And once they begin to understand that, and you help them access to their kids, you put them in a position to be able to be stable economically, emotionally, physically, they're willing to do whatever they need to do. But unfortunately, we have a lot of barriers that are created because that intervention is not happening in an effective way because there's lack of funding and support for these guys.
So what do you think, Brandon? I mean, you sitting there asking all the questions. What do you know? You a girl daddy. Talk to us. I can't hear you.
I'm a girl dad to the end. I thought we was gonna have a boy. We're having a girl. I'm having another one, man. I was like,
Oh,
damn
wow.
it.
Okay.
I'm a girl dad for real. But for me, I think when we talked about the. Go ahead, guys.
What you do, Brandon, to have him girl? What you do, brother?
Man, I struck. Me and the ancestors just decided, look, I ain't having no son.
Okay. All right, brother.
But for me, I think using that public health structure of prevention, intervention, and certiorari, I can't ever pronounce the third level. I think part of it is the work that both Guy and Charles are doing with the intervention stage, and it's helping these men who are already fathers understand what that role means to them now and help kind of correct some of the things that didn't go quite right for them so they can be the best possible fathers they can be. That's one step. Upstream is helping the young guys who are budding fathers to understand that that is a role that they can have by choice and they can have in a way that is healthy for them. And I think a lot of young men, unfortunately, get into fatherhood unexpectedly.
Yep.
And a lot, unfortunately, too, they get into fatherhood with bad experiences like myself with their own fathers. So the expectation of fatherhood is already kind of tainted or flawed in that way. And I think that having constructive conversations with young men about what fatherhood can be from their perspective helps kind of when they get to that place, they already have a frame sort of built for that. And I think that overall in our community, shifting a narrative for what fathers are supposed to be and having role models in the community who are just constructive men help. I think we have so many non-constructive men that, throwing shade on fathers is very easy. We're going to see those Facebook posts. They're probably already out there today where people are, shouting out their mom because their mom was the father in the household. And, as a dad, I and matter of fact, I'll be completely transparent. I used to do that. I used to put my mom, I used to throw my mom out there years ago saying, this is her second Mother's Day and things like that. Not understanding the importance that fathers have, whether they're there or not. But really, that was my own trauma and pain that I was processing due to the lack of connection I had with my own father. That's my stuff. That doesn't have to be shared with nobody else. And I've been able to kind of overcome that and work through that because I am a dad and I understand how significant today is and every day as a father, because Black men play an important role. Earlier, we talked about, Charles was talking about just showing up and he kind of slipped up and he almost said leadership. Then he kind of backed up. But I think that fatherhood is leadership, but that doesn't mean that motherhood isn't leadership or there aren't other types of leadership. But that just highlights how important it is to have fathers who are able to nurture, who are able to provide guidance, who are able to to build financial foundations. It just shows that is something that we need, and we can't be, we can't stray away from it and think that it's a negative thing on someone else's role in the community, because it is a positive thing for us. So that's my thoughts.
Okay, so let me see. One of the things has always been amazing to me around fatherhood in terms of systems, in terms of our society and that kind of thing. And I bring this up and people are like, oh, that's great, but we ain't done nothing about it, right? We got all these programs that talk about family. Got family in the name, right?
Dad's
got
missing.
family in the name and don't deal with fathers
at all. Yeah.
What kind of sign is that? So basically, one of the things that I think we've missed in terms of the idea, when welfare became part of the Black community, because it wasn't always, right? Because we know a lot of programs didn't include Black folks. I mean, we can go down a whole list of popular programs that didn't include Black folks. Like things like Salvation Army didn't help Black folks during, the Great Depression. Right. And that kind of stuff. But you can take the old people tell you about that kind of stuff. So that's another conversation for another day. But you got all these programs that say family, but none of them deal with fathers. And I keep questioning, and people thought oh, there you go, being that old grouchy old Black man, critical, whatever. But it's true. If everything, and when we think about welfare, it says about, in service for family and children, but it didn't include men, other than the fact that where you at and what's your check when I ain't got no check. Okay, we can get so system wise, we had this was never about. We want to complain about where father's at, but if you ain't inviting me and opening the doors for me to be there, don't be surprised when I don't come in, right? And I'll ask programs, well, you say you about family, why don't you do? Well, they're hard to deal with. We can't find them. Well, the thing is when you done set up a system that I have to hide for my family to get services, and then you want to talk about I can't find them, That's no different than an organization talking about I can't find black employees. Well, the history of your organization says you don't treat black employees well. Why would I try to be seen by you? Right? And so the thing is then they want to start talking about co-parenting. The parents should think about the child should be first. Right? The welfare of the child should be first. The system is not set up for the welfare of the child to be first. If you look at it, especially black children, right? Even the way they, and there's other evidence, like if we talk about especially the last 40 years, when we talk about the way they dealt with black mamas who had drug problems, it was to take their children to punish them.
Mm-hmm.
So you want everyday people to do something the system is incapable of doing. And so systems, I go back to this term about compassion and accountability. If you ain't showing no compassion to men in general and fathers, as we're talking about, how do I learn how to have compassion for myself and have compassion for the folks that count on me? Right? And then we talk about going upstream, and sometimes this is unpopular. But I'm going to go there, go upstream. Because we've been dealing with this all willy-nilly within our own community with the joking around baby daddies and making it so easy to have children and walk away. And that not just fathers, by the way. We really need to re-examine and take a close examination of how the traumatic experiences of being a child in our community in certain aspects, being, trying to do the right thing, and then keep getting hit over the head by systems and our community, is look at a phenomenon that we don't like admitting to, is a generation of young people who are consummating their relationships on the back of children. Oh, look at that look. Yes, I just said that. Consummating their relationships on the back of children.
Right.
And so you get this young couple, man, Mr. Simmons, me and girlfriend, and this cat might have 5 kids already.
Mm-hmm.
And 3 mothers of their children. See, I almost went there. You see, I almost went there. and then we've been together for a couple, for a year or so, man. I'm really into this relationship, and girlfriend wants to have a child.
Mm-hmm.
I said, how you doing with the other 5? Why you got to go there? No. How are you doing with the other 5? Well, girlfriend really want this. I said, but you're forgetting about your responsibility. So see, we don't want to pay the consequences for our behavior sometimes. I even know couples who ain't even had children talking about we've been together a while and we're thinking about having a child. They ain't thinking about doing nothing else. So you consummate this relationship on the back of a child. See, when another person come in a relationship get funky real quick when you got 2 folks who barely know what being a parent is. Now the relationship ain't existing. Now we've definitely got some chaos and anger, right? And now who pays the price? The child. When a child is born with responsibility to hold a relationship together, it is not fair to the children. Another thing, I work with young men and I ask them the question, do you know you can have sex and not have a child? And they look at me like I'm crazy. Look at me like I'm crazy. What you mean? I said, man, I shouldn't say this out loud. I had plenty of girlfriends. I didn't leave much evidence. And I walked out on a few of them when we're talking about neither one's got no condoms. I don't know you that well, girl. I got to go. Because I didn't want a bunch of children. It was a conscious thing. And you know what the guys would say? Well, Mr. Simmons, why ain't nobody talking to us about this? Why ain't nobody talking about this? I said, because half the old dudes don't know no better. And then when you bring up this stuff, I'll get pushback. Oh, you just blaming the victim. No, I'm telling you the truth, man. If we don't start dealing, you can't heal without no truth. This is not our fault. I mean, because if you're a result of being given misinformation, being lied to by the system that says, you know, we want you to be a good father, and you do everything to get in my way, and then I try to be a good father, I get confused, or I have my father in my life, and he tells me, you know, I don't have to like you to be your father and stuff like that, like it, you know, what Denzel said in Fences in the Backyard. That was my experience with my father.
Mm-hmm.
No wonder they're confused, but they want to be good to the children because they want to live a good childhood through their children that they didn't have the opportunity.
Right.
And so we can continue to talk about systems. We can continue to talk about systems. And I'll let y'all do that. But there's a lot of work we got to do internally about how is the child the center of attention, right? Do you have to have a child in every relationship you've been in? Again, you know, I mean, because the thing is that's the other confusion. Because women, see, the other thing is, and I know this is Father's Day, that we don't talk enough about is the fact, you know, we always talk about, well, you know, not having fathers in the house having a real negative effect on boys. Man, it has a real negative effect on girls even earlier.
Right. Yep.
You know, because they're looking for the perfect daddy. I've dealt with the young women, and they got like one young lady, she says, I didn't grow up like this. I got 3 kids, 3 different fathers. And they always want to be with one. They always want to be with at least one of the daddies, so they can feel halfway whole. So you got these 2 confused, probably good kids, good young people, and trying to be together, and then one of them got the skills, and the loser is the children.
Right.
And then you want to ask questions about how do you get young people to be so uncaring about other people when we start talking about violence and that kind of stuff. It's all connected. So it's this and that, right? And we can push both of them because I've seen the work done. But we gotta be honest about it all if we really want to have a real effect on what goes forward. I am really scared for my grandkids going forward in some of the stuff that's going on within the community, not the stuff outside.
Right.
Because it's easy to talk about what the systems ain't doing. So I could go because, you know, it's like, you know, because again, it just irritates me because I'll get all kind of, oh, look, there they go again, being negative. Blah. No, the brothers I work with get it. And I really mean this. I've had them in tears. I'm like, Mr. Simmons, why don't anybody else talk to us like this?
Right.
And tell us, if I had you, I probably would, you know, I love my children. I might have still had them, but I would have had them differently.
Right.
Yeah.
So we're going to get ready to close up here. Charles, any final thoughts on fatherhood? Any messages to fathers that you want to share as we close out? And then I'll come to you next, Guy.
Okay.
Congratulations to the brothers that are fathers. Once it happens, it's an obligation. So regardless on your relationship with that woman, if you didn't know her cycle and you weren't protected, you're obligated for a minimum of 18 years. It's not about this point. And the prenatal piece, if we can teach, you know, that there's ways to do things, and if you don't want kids, don't have them. Are you planning for them? Is it physical? If you having children out of stress management, sex for stress management, it's not going to work out for us. So with fatherhood, I would say it should be a choice. It shouldn't be a surprise. And if you're not prepared, understand the human body, and there's ways you can get your little pleasure without having babies. That's what I would say.
Absolutely. How about you, Guy, closing out?
Yeah, incredible conversation. You can always learn in having these conversations from what I've known, what I've experienced personally and professionally, and obviously listen to wise elders like Sam, because that's what you can appreciate and respect about our elders. They have the wisdom to see around the corner, right? Because they watched it play out, right? right. They watched it play all the way out from those of us saying, hey, we're impacted negatively for not having a father in the household and some of the things that we did or made decisions about or unfortunately suffer consequences for. But then there's the other side, as Sam, so eloquently stated. Yeah, but there's challenges with having a father in the house as well, too. If he is not emotionally stable or suffering from trauma or from his father, and just a number of different things. So I think you got to watch it play out. And I've had the beauty to be able to watch it play out and I think as you said, Brandon, where you started in terms of what you thought and ultimately where you ended once you became a father, you watch that also play out as a father when watching your child become an adult, and then they have kids, so it constantly plays out and how you see it. And you can see it and get a clear perspective from a Sam standpoint in terms of being able to see that, have that wisdom, because we don't know how it's going to play out until we grow up, right? Unfortunately, we know that some dads did a lot that they could early on, and for whatever reason, it didn't work out between them and mom, and he was seen or no heard of again. We don't know all the stories, but we learn it to create a larger perspective, a broader perspective for ourselves, to have more information, because we have more information, then we can decipher what is this story or this story, what's the actual truth as it plays out ourselves. And if we get in earlier, as I was saying about the earlier piece, and model what we expect of them, that's where the training comes in, because it's tough to know that early if there's no proper training, because by the time you're intervening, it's too late. So with that being said, we have to model the behavior we expect early on. We have to have the resources available to intervene. And then ultimately, we got to lead by example. And more importantly, and most importantly, in my opinion, learn from what came before us and respect the elders.
Absolutely. Any final thoughts from you, Sam, before we close out?
No, I'm glad we had this conversation, and as I said earlier, I commend all of you young men and y'all watching y'all. Actually, I've been knowing all of you for a long time, and actually watching you grow, in many ways, and becoming the fathers and men. And Guy, are you a grandfather now?
I am.
Yeah, that's what I thought. Yeah,
86.
Yeah. And so, and being, the grandfather, and even knowing how that, being able to navigate that role in terms of dealing with your child, and how far you can go with all that, because you got to be emotionally stable in all aspects of this, because you can go too far, especially the ones I love is them grandfathers who weren't really around, and all of a sudden finally establish a relationship with their child, and they want to run in and want to dictate stuff, and they want to get their feelings hurt when the folks, some of their pain comes out on them, and I'm your daddy. Yeah, well, yeah, and it can get ugly. So I ain't one of them kind of grandfathers, but I've seen it. So I got to know my lane.
Can they trigger trauma, Sam?
Oh my God, man.
I'll stop right there.
Oh man, oh my God, I've seen some trauma triggered in all sides of my family behind that. I could act a couple of them out, but there's never too late to get, learn your emotional development and learning how to manage your emotions. It's never too late for that, especially in our community, right? We might feel historically justified in what we feel, but that don't mean nothing right now when it comes to the best for our children and our community.
Yes,
absolutely. And my final parting words will be, fatherhood is a role of dignity, honor, and respect. But in the words of Dr. Francis Cress Welsing, when you play with sex, the joke is on the offspring. So let's not play with sex.
Absolutely.
All right. So happy Father's Day to all the gentlemen out there and grandfathers, and let's keep this thing rolling because our babies need us. And we'll see you again next week on the Healing Brothers Podcast. Peace.